Welcome to Thursday Thoughts, your weekly dose of real, honest conversation on all things personal growth. These are the chats Lucy and I love having every week over on Instagram. They're unfiltered, unedited, and always rooted in practical tools and a dose of inspiration. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to Thursday Thoughts, which Polly and I are not doing on Instagram Live, as you can probably tell, because the sound quality is probably a bit better and there's not the usual kerfuffle at the beginning of waiting for whichever of us to come on, as there normally is. But anyway, we're recording this on Zoom because Polly's away for a couple of weeks, so we're getting a couple in the can. And today we are talking about ego. Which I find to be a fascinating topic personally, because at the end of the day, we all have an ego. The question is, how big is yours? How much do you allow it to impact the way that you live your life, the things that you do, the things that you say, the actions that you take? You know, ego is obviously there for a reason, and it is there ultimately to keep us safe, to protect us. But in this world, we don't need it in the same way that we needed it back in the day when there were saber-toothed tigers running around. And sometimes, quite frankly, our ego is what holds us back from doing the things that we truly want to do. Our ego is very good at being very fearful and telling us not to do something. No, 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 don't do that. It really does hold us back. So we have to be able to learn to kind of recognize when our ego is getting in our own way. And we have to learn to be able to set it down, or at least just have it in the passenger seat, not driving the fucking car of your life. Because if you let your ego drive every aspect of your life, then you're probably going to stay the same, because your ego wants you to stay the same. It wants you to do everything that you already know. It wants you to feel comfortable, and it just wants everything to feel familiar. But of course, comfort and familiarity are not the way that we evolve in our lives. They're not the way that, we don't make changes by staying comfortable and doing things that are familiar to us. So, yes, I think this conversation is about how do we recognize when our ego is getting in the way, and how do we kind of put it aside. And I think this conversation about ego always really plays into the fear of what other people think, because so often what our ego is worrying about is what other people are thinking. So I think it's kind of one and the same in some ways.
Yes. I mean, I think just to define ego, because for some, a lot of us use ego in the sense that, we're almost, if we've got a big ego, you're almost too big for your boots and you're a little bit brash and perhaps a bit arrogant. But actually, we're talking about it in the sense that it's that voice in your head which is pulling you back, holding you back, saying, oh, no, don't do that, because careful, what might go wrong? What might they say? That's not safe. People might laugh at you. It's that voice which is constantly, holding you back. And as Lucy said, it was, we've evolved with that ego because, again, it's part of that sort of tribe mentality when we were evolving, that so that we weren't outcast from our people, to, again, keep everybody safe. But nowadays, actually, it's a real pain in the arse because because it's stopping us from often taking action towards the things that we want to do. So mine has been a real pain in the ass, in keeping me small, not wanting me to be too out there, to speak my mind, to take the action, to do things which, might bring attention to myself, make me different from other people. We often want to blend in with everybody else. So the first step always, I believe, with this is we have to be aware of that voice. We have to have an element of awareness of when that voice is piping up. So that really is down to that sort of inner work, getting quiet, going inwards. Because if that voice is the loudest voice in your head, it's very hard sometimes to recognize that isn't you, that isn't your voice. You might just think that is your personality. Oh no, I don't. I just don't do those sort of things. I'm just a really quiet person. I don't like taking risks. But actually, that is really your ego. You might want to take the risk, but your ego is very loud and it's stopping you. So it's almost it's about noticing it first of all, and then having a bit of a curiosity to like, oh, okay, that's interesting that voice is so loud. Is that what I really want?
Yeah.
Or is that what my ego is saying to keep me safe in case of me making an absolute fool of myself because I'm worrying about what people are thinking?
Yeah.
So it's more about noticing that, finding a bit of curiosity within that, and then trying to hear and find out and discover what is it that you actually really want. And if you're feeling a little bit of frustration in life with not getting to do the things that you really truly want to do, or if something feels misaligned, then that is a really good sign that your ego is really getting in the way for what you want. You know, when we're sort of flowing towards that thing we want, when we're actually moving and when we're in that more in that sort of flow state, that is when, you know, you've put your ego aside and you're very much going in the direction of what you want to be doing.
Yeah.
But it's that, like, it's almost like a to and fro misalignment, isn't it, of ego getting in the way. It's not quite working. So yeah.
Completely. And yeah, I mean, like you basically said, you know, our ego, the problem with our ego, and again, putting aside when it's necessary and when it's useful and when we need it, but it can be very, very, very convincing, you know, and we can often just believe whatever that voice is telling us without question. Like it's just, we so often just take it as truth, and that's why it holds us back. Because if you're trying to leave your job, and your ego is going, no, 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 you've got a pension, you've got a holiday, and you've got healthcare, and you've got blah, 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 blah. You know, even if the true essence of you wants to leave that job and find something else, your ego is going to go, halt, like, you know, red light, no, 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 do not do this. And so we have to recognize, I think, that, like you've also said, that voice is not actually the true essence of us. That really is our ego. And one of the ways, you know, meditation is a really good one for this, because what meditation does is it allows you to, what we always want is to find that separation between the true essence of who we actually are, that kind of that consciousness that is who we really, really are, that consciousness that is connected to everything and everyone. We want to find the separation between that and our ego, i.e., that negative voice in your head. You know, if you're one of those people, as I very much used to be, that is a constant fucking soundtrack. You're not this enough. You're a dick. Oh my God, what did you say that for? Blah, 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 blah. What we want to do is to find the separation, find the gap, and remember that the trueness of us is not that voice. And in meditation, you can you can sort of slow your brain down enough to be able to really get in touch with that intuitive part of you, and you can kind of be the watcher and be the witness of your ego. You can sort of, and again, it's literally about finding the gap, and understanding that there is a gap. Like that ego voice is not you, that is your ego. And when you sit in meditation, it becomes, I find anyway, it becomes easier to be aware of, and you know, what it does basically is it means that you stop taking everything on as just fact, because when you are able to take a step back and look at your thought, it's like you want to be able to look at your thoughts and observe your thoughts rather than taking them as fact and feeling that you are your thoughts. It's being able to observe them as you are the watcher, that I am consciousness part of you can watch those thoughts and just be curious about those thoughts, but not immediately identify with them. And that, I think, is what we do with that ego voice, is that we very often we just allow it to we identify with it where we shouldn't. We allow it to define us. We allow it to define what we're doing, how we're behaving, the actions that we're taking, all of the things. And we need to, find that separation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a really good way of doing this as well is just by questioning your thoughts, questioning what you're thinking. Actually, is that truth? Is that really the truth? You might be thinking about yourself, I am so useless at, I don't know, whatever it is. It's like, actually, is that true? Is it really true? Or is that just the voice in your head telling you that? And it's about being able to recognize, as you say, separate from that. And then being able to tune into that gut feel. If you have a gut feel about something, that generally is you. That is you. That is a real you. I was talking to a friend actually the other day, and she was telling me that she'd been offered, she's a single mum, and she'd been offered this really good job. And she said the moment that she was offered this job, she got this real sick feeling in her stomach that, oh God, it just made her feel a bit sick. She knew it would be massively stressful, loads of hours, yet the money was good. And that's kind of why she felt she ought to take it. But she said, I just felt sick in the pit of my stomach. And I was like, my God. And she said, do you know, for the first time ever, I listened to that and I turned it down, trusting that something else was going to come along. And of course it did. Something else did come. And I was so impressed with her because it was that recognition of like, her brain, her ego was saying you should take it, because you ought. Those words are really good clues, if you're working from I should, I ought to, because it's like, that's what your brain's saying. That's what the narrative is. You should do that. But actually, if it's making you feel dreadful and it doesn't feel right, then 9 times out of 10, it's not the right decision for you. And so trust that. And when you can learn to trust that, then actually, life will suddenly feel a little bit easier or happier, or you're more joyful.
Yeah, totally. And also that you just reminded me of something else that I wanted to add, which is that the ego is very, very loud. That is one way of sort of distinguishing between what is your ego speaking to you and what is your intuition, i.e. that higher part of you, that conscious awareness. The ego tends to be really loud and in your fucking face, whereas your intuition tends to be quieter. It's that still, small voice of calm. For me, my intuition has been saying to me since I was a late teen, go and live in the States. You're meant to be in the US. Clearly, I haven't done anything about it, but let's not even go there. But that desire for me has never, ever, ever left me and will never leave me until I fucking do something about it. But it's not loud. It's just persistent and always there, and it's just quiet, and it's just that is an intuitive feeling. Whereas the ego will be like, rah, 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 no, don't, the ego is kind of full of panic and urgency and fear. And that is the way to sort of distinguish between those two things for anyone who's in any doubt, because it can be difficult to understand what is your ego and what is your intuition. It can be really difficult to like make a decision when you're confused about, you don't know what is right for you. You don't know. And the example of your friend that's such a brilliant example. That's such a brilliant example where it's like, oh, but it's really good money. But your intuition's going, no, you don't want it. No, it's going to destroy your soul. Blah, 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 blah. Get the hell out. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Whereas the ego will have been going, but it's really good money, blah, 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 blah. So that's how I tend to differentiate between those two things.
Yeah, it's that feeling of you just sort of know. And, we've both felt it in past careers, when I was teaching, or actually when I had my tuition business, it was doing really well. Why did I leave it? But it kind of felt like it was just sucking my soul. I didn't love it anymore. I just felt like there was something else I wanted to do. And, it took a while to listen. But it is about following those nudges, those feelings, and not allowing your ego to cloud that out and get in the way. And you know, again, it is that whole point of, yeah, are you worrying too much about what other people are going to think about the decisions that you're making? And quite often it might be family members, it might be because it might be a societal thing because that's what you should be doing, rather than actually what you want to be doing.
Totally.
So, it's really about being conscious of what are those constraints that you're putting onto yourself and that ego is getting in the way of. Yeah. What else, Lucy, in terms of trying to deal with that voice in our heads, which we can learn to try, it's kind of just, I think, first of all, become aware of it. Second of all, get quiet, start to notice it, and just when it's there. And then thirdly, just get curious and ask yourself, is that true? Is that true, what it's saying? And often, you have to really disentangle that, because if it's saying you're not good enough, that belief about yourself might be so deep and inherent that you actually probably going, well, it is true, but it's not. We're all worthy. We're all good enough to be here. You weren't born not good enough. So it's about really disentangling all of that.
And also it's about like remembering or sort of, just being aware of the fact that if your ego is holding you back, as it so often does, from doing something that is right for you, just remind yourself that if you're not living in alignment, your life is not going to feel good. That doesn't mean when you're living in alignment, everything feels wonderful all of the time. But I mean, you mentioned both of our previous jobs. Like I have been in jobs where my soul, my intuition was just well, I mean, it wasn't even whispering silently. It was basically silently screaming at me to get the hell out. My ego is saying, "Oh no, you can't leave another job," and "Oh, what's everyone going to think?" and blah 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 blah. But do remember that if you constantly allow yourself to be kind of steered by what your ego wants you to do, then that isn't necessarily the way to live the best life possible for you. Because in order to live, the kind of the fullest expression of yourself, if you like, we have to lay down our ego. We have to set aside that voice and really listen to what it is that we truly want for us. And, nobody's perfect at this, myself included. Like, we all allow it to hold us back sometimes, but I think it is worth bearing in mind that if you want to live a life that feels good, you've got to be living in alignment with your heart's desires. That sounds a bit wanky, but you do. We all want to be living in alignment with our heart's desires, and so often our ego doesn't allow us to do that. So I think sometimes it's as simple as having to understand that and just stand up to your ego and be like, no, I'm not going to allow this to dictate the direction of my life. And again, we've talked about this so many times, but it comes back to being uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable to go against if your ego's saying, no, but your family are going to think this and your friends are going to think this and they're all going to think you're mad, blah, 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 blah. It's really hard to go, I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway. It is hard, but it that doesn't mean it isn't possible. It is very much possible, but we as always, when we're trying to grow and make our lives better, we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We said this in our previous Thursday Thoughts last week. You got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is the only way to move forward. If nothing changes, nothing changes. But the change has to start within you.
Yeah.
Change always has to start inside of yourself. And that starts with recognizing the difference between that crazy, loud, fearful, voice of the ego that is trying to keep you small and keep you safe and keep you the same, and that intuitive voice inside of you, which is the true essence of you that wants you to live the life that you truly want to live.
Yeah. Also, to be mindful of the fact of when the ego crops up in terms of metrics. So we might often get caught up in numbers of followers or numbers of attendees or numbers of friends or whatever it might be. And our ego can get in the way of going, oh, well, there's no point doing it if you've only got X number of people who are going to turn up, or only if you've got that number of likes. We can get really bogged down with that. Our ego can really get in the way of going, well, you're that's no good. And actually, I think, this is a hard one for people. And again, I suppose I'm thinking here about social media, but also in terms of, having a business and having people who show up to various things, particularly online or even in person, it can be really hard. But for example, last year, sometimes it's a good reminder that everything always works out for a reason. So it just made me think of last year. I ran co-hosted this retreat in Austria. We had 6 people turn up. We could have had more, and initially at the time, bit of a bruised ego. Oh no, why don't we want more? Why don't we have more? That's a bit, and so I was a little bit like, oh, but we did it anyway, and it was wonderful and perfect, and actually the best training ground because it was a small group and wonderful. And then this year we've done it again, and again, initially it was quite slow burn to get the sales, but trusted it was all going to be okay. And now we've sold out, and now we've got 17 people, which is great. And actually a little more than we had initially anticipated. But now I realize that if I hadn't have guided the breath work for last year with a smaller group, I would now be really worried and nervous about doing it this year. I needed to have that smaller number last year to be able to do the larger number this year. So I think we have to remind ourselves, to trust it. Don't get caught up in the metrics and the numbers, because sometimes you might not be ready for what you initially want. So it's, everything is for a reason. So that, I think we can all worry, oh, I only got 2 likes of that post, or I've only got a few followers. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Everything works out for a reason. You will be helping somebody along the line, or someone is watching or listening, or, it's all, it might be frustrating. Yes, but let's just try. And I think how much of that is ego, of like, you feel like you should be doing better, and how much of that is actually okay, just be okay with it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, very wise words. Well, I think we're done, dearly done.
Perfect.
Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll be back next
time
week to talk about who knows what.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.